My name is Nathaniel. This is our Cougars Care workshop for solving conflicts and improving relationships. So hopefully that's what you're here for. If not, sorry, but that's what this is. Those of you that are online, Jordan is sending you a digital copy of the handouts right now. Those of you that are here in person, feel free to grab one. We've got some files right up here. Welcome in. Thanks for coming. So we're gonna probably spend the next, hour and a half together today, kind of diving into this stuff. And if you could give me the next slide there, Jordan, when you have a chance. Today we're gonna start off like with talk about relationships, what makes relationships healthy, unhealthy, or even abusive. And then like once we talk about that, like we're also gonna then talk about like conflict management and communication strategies. Hopefully the idea being like we know what the goal is, what a healthy relationship is. How do we get there? Hopefully, we can teach you some communication techniques that will be useful for that. So, those are going to be the three things today. We're going to talk about relationships, then talk about communication, then specifically communication and conflict mediation. Logistically, today, those of you that are here for like SONA credits or anything like that, please make sure that you're signed up on the SONA portal for the psychology department. If you're not signed up on the SONA portal and you need credits, please just email me and we can add you after the fact. Because if you try and go on right now, I'm not sure they'll let you register since the meeting's already started. So just make sure to let us know. If you need attendance verification for anything else as well, please stay all the way to the end of the workshop and we'll put a QR code up on the screen with a very short survey. We'd love to have your feedback of any like things we could change or improve, but also make sure you get to the end of that survey at the very least and just put in your name and email address. That way we'll know you're here and that way we'll be able to go in and grant some credits or if your professor asks to verify your attendance or whatever, right? If you can go ahead and give me the next slide. We're going to be talking about mental health stuff, specifically relational health stuff today. This isn't like a therapy session or a group therapy session or anything like that though, but I do ask like when we do some small group breakouts and things that you respect each other's opinions and communicate kindly towards one another. Those of you that are online, please, feel free to leave your cameras off and stay muted like during the lecture bits of this. But when we go into breakout groups, please make sure to turn them on and can communicate with each other. We're also split up into small groups here and we can chit chat. While we're talking about small groups and stuff like that, I should mention recording. We are recording this workshop today, but we're just recording the like me parts. We're going to cut out all of like the small group discussions. We're going to cut out any question or answer, that kind of stuff, so that everybody can feel they have ability to participate. And it'll just be my face stuck up on our YouTube. None of you will appear on there. So in terms of taking breaks, if you need to step away for whatever reason, because like the content is rough or just because you need to use the restroom or because you're bored, I don't know, whatever, feel free, just take care of yourselves. Restrooms are right outside this door for those of you that are in person here. Finally, questions. Please ask me whatever questions that you have. It's actually a lot more interesting when people ask questions and we can turn this material into something that's more applicable to your lives, and also know that there's no dumb questions, right? Some of us are like fourth year psych majors, some of us are like first year math majors, right? So there's a lot of different like levels of exposure to some of the stuff that we're talking about today. But I guarantee if you have a question, like somebody else probably has that question too. So I'd love to encourage as many questions as possible. So with all that being said, all the logistics out of the way, let's get into it, right? Why are we talking about relationships? Why does it matter? I mean, I think even in scripture, like Genesis, we start off, right, with the idea that it's not good for people to be alone, right? And I know we're not all Christians here, but many of us are, and this is a Christian university, and I think grounding this in that space is important, right? And I think like loneliness and things like that have become even more like pronounced, especially since like, I mean, the pandemic really made it like pretty bad when we all couldn't see each other for a long time, but it also like the ways that we interact with each other is changing all the time too, right? And like the ways that we are feel more and more lonely, and even though we're more and more connected sometimes. And so I'm hoping that today we can talk about like how to form good relationships, right? And the Bible like gives us some ideas on that as well, like in Colossians here. Good relationships like are based on compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, and love, right? Most of all, love, like is a very famous, of course, verse. I don't know if you've been in any weddings recently, but a lot of times they use this one in weddings, right? I think that those are really good, like places to start. but I think that's also pretty vague, right? How does that actually apply to the day to day? So if you could give me the next slide there. We're going to start off with, oh, one more slide, please. We're going to start off with our first like breakout exercise, just kind of break the ice a little bit. So those of you that are in here, get into like groups of 3 or 4, who's ever sitting around here at the top. Those of you online, Jordan's going to open breakout groups for you in just a moment for you to accept. But I'd love you just to introduce yourselves to each other, get to know each other just a little bit, and then go ahead and talk about like what relationships have you seen in your life? These can be friendship relationships, romantic relationships, like family relationships, whatever, right? But what relationships have you seen that are going well, right? That seem to be really healthy, and what do we think makes them healthy, right? Like, what are those aspects, right? Because I'd love to hear what you're already thinking about what makes relationships healthy. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay. So I think that, and this is from loveisrespect.org, which is a great website for more like information on like healthy and unhealthy relationships. There's also a copy of this on page 2 in your workbooks here. But I think that we kind of named a lot of these pieces that are like factors of a healthy relationship, right? We mentioned trust, communication, respect, um, all of those kinds of things. So, boundaries is not on there, but should be on there probably, right? Um, but I want to particularly highlight a couple more here, right? One is like mutual choice making, right? And so that could be about, like physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, but anything really, any kind of mutual choice making. And also like boundaries falls a little bit into this last one here, like ability to like maintain your own independence within relationship as well. Like, oftentimes, especially in like romantic relationships, but sometimes in like friendship or family relationships too, like we spend all of our time only with a person and feel like we can't spend time apart, right? And like the ability to spend time apart is actually part of a healthy relationship. It's a sign of a healthy relationship. So like I think that we really well kind of captured a lot of these pieces, right? But what I want to highlight as well is the fact that I've got 3 sections up here, right? I've got a healthy section, an unhealthy section, and an abusive section, right? So hopefully we're able to recognize some things as abuse where they show up, right? If we are in a situation where someone is mistreatful or harmful in their communication, accusatory, gaslighting, controlling or isolating, that's a little bit of a typo there I should have fixed. Um, like those kinds of things like are quintessential hallmarks, unfortunately, of like relational abuse, right? And in those spaces, like it can be really hard to notice sometimes, and it can also be really hard to get out of those kinds of situations, right? Especially like the isolation piece is a big thing. Oftentimes, unfortunately, when we fall into abusive relationships, other people fall into abusive relationships, right? We've been so isolated by the person who is abusing us that like we're unable to really easily leave that situation, right? And so there should be, I hope, a lot of compassion for folks in those spaces, right? Even if like you keep telling your friend, like, oh, you need to leave this relationship or whatever, or this, that, or the other thing, and they're not listening to you, or you're trying to get out of a relationship and you're finding it a really hard thing to do, right? We should have compassion for that. It's not an easy thing to do, right? And so instead of being frustrated or self-blaming or other blaming, right, we should try and find as much compassion as we can in those spaces. And if you find yourself in one of those like positions, right, I think it can be very useful to seek professional help, right? We have our counseling center here. You can come in anytime you want. I'm happy to meet with you, talk it through, help you find ways to assure your safety, those kinds of things, right? That's a little bit beyond what we can do in a workshop here today, right? Because those situations get pretty serious, right? And so individualized professional help can be really important, right? But what I want us to focus on more is this unhealthy relationship spectrum, right? Because an unhealthy relationship dynamic often leads into what eventually can become an abusive dynamic, right? But it doesn't have to, right? Because if we notice the areas where our relationships are unhealthy, we can either take actions, hopefully to help fix that and help them to become more healthy, right? Or we can take actions to distance ourselves from those relationships to, terminate those relationships before they can become, more dangerous, right? And so I want us to think a lot about like these kinds of things, right? And so where we're looking at our relationships and where we're seeing like disrespect, right? Or where we're looking at our relationships and we're not talking about the things that we need to be talking about, important things that we just pretend aren't happening, right? Or where we're like not trusting of folks, right? Like I was already kind of alluding to that, right? You could have like an romantic relationship, right? Like, oh no, I trust you, to go out, but like I don't trust like the other people, so you should really not go out because like there'd be all these other bad people that I'm protecting you from, right? That kind of like language, right? That's not trust. Like you're not putting any trust into your partner in that way. Dishonesty, right? Very can easily get into that gaslighting space. Again, like pressure, right? Forcing people to do things that they don't want to do, or even like that all the time together one, right? And so some of this all the time together one, right? Is like oftentimes the factor of an important relationship that you're just excited about too, right? So a new romantic relationship, maybe you like spend a ton of time together, or a new friendship, right? You meet somebody new, they're super cool, they're in all of your classes together, right? You're, whatever. Like those kinds of things are normal, but they're unhealthy. If we can catch them early, we can try and do something about it, right? You see where I'm kind of driving at here, right? So that's what I want to focus on for today. How do we move from unhealthy relationships, the yellow flags, right, that we have in our relationships? How do we turn them into green flags? And they may not be in every area. You may be thinking about your relationship with your roommate, your relationship with your mom, your relationship with your partner, whatever, right? Each one of them is going to be like healthy in some areas, less healthy in other areas, right? Like, so how can we address those individual pieces to make a whole relationship, which is broadly healthy but has some unhealthy elements? How can we make it more fulfilling too, right? It's not just about making it not bad, but about making it even better. So that's a lot of me chattering about this. How do we do that? If you could go on to the next slide for me, Jordan. Um, this is where I want to talk about types of communication, right? Because the way that we talk matters. And so basically, there's two major types of like stances you could take in a communication style, right? A passive stance or an aggressive stance, right? And then based on those, like you can get yourself into, I'm sure you've all heard about like passive aggressive communication before, or have had those passive aggressive fights with like a roommate or a sibling or something like that, right? We can get ourselves into those passive aggressive spaces, right? And the key to get out of those things, like the solution from like a psychological perspective, is to learn how to engage in what we call assertive communication rather than passive aggressive or passive aggressive communication. So if you give me the next slide, I'll talk about those a little bit more. What do I mean by that? Passive communication. Passive communication is basically where you sacrifice your needs for somebody else, right? And we sacrifice our needs to avoid conflict oftentimes, right? And, like oftentimes we think of that as being like a good thing, right? We think of like, oh, just being easygoing or just being, like not making a fuss or things like that. And like passive communication styles, when we defer our rights to what we need to another person and what they need, there are pros to it, right? You feel initial sense of peace. There's an initial sense of harmony. Maybe it's easy to go along and start like forming new friendships or new relationships, right? But the problem with that is, right, if you're deferring your needs for other people's needs, your needs are not getting met, right? That's the major problem there, right? And so you could approach it on the other side too. You could be aggressive in your communication, right? You could demand what you want, when you want it, how you want it, right? And the benefit of that is like, hey, you got what you needed, you got what you wanted, right? Like that's an important thing. We need to have our needs met in our lives, right? But nobody's gonna like you right? If you do that. Like eventually those friendships are gonna break down, right? But same thing with the passive communication. If you could give me the next slide here. Like we oftentimes engage in like passive communication at first, right? Like to just like go along and get along, make a lot of friends, all that kind of thing. But our anger builds up, right? Because our needs aren't being met, right? And then just one step too far, and now like you're just like absolutely screaming at like your partner or whatever for like, I don't know, not taking out the trash when they said they would, right? But it's not about that anymore, right? But it's about the suppression of your needs so long that your anger builds up so much that you can't help but engage in exaggerated aggressive communication, right? And so there's that like deny, 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 explode kind of feeling in a lot of communication that we find ourselves in, right? So the that's why passive aggressive communication starts to happen a lot as well, right? I'm sure some of you have been in passive aggressive moments before. There's like the group text that everybody's in, like with all the roommates, and you're like, hey, just saying, we all agreed that like would clean up on Saturday or whatever, but I woke up this morning and everything was still a mess from last night. Haha. It's like, no, you're very clearly talking about Jane. Like she was the one who had people over and did not clean up the stuff, but you are not willing to call her out or text her individually or just put this like vague passive aggressive note here. This also happens, I like all the time, right? When people are like subtweeting each other or things like that, various social media platforms, right? This is happening all the time. You're trying to get out your frustration in a way that doesn't really end up working. I always tell whenever I give this workshop, a really good friend of mine in college, she and her roommates, like, they would just leave each other like the most passive aggressive, like rude sticky notes to communicate because they would not talk to each other or text each other or whatever. And then eventually you would go into like their apartment and there was just sticky notes on everything and sticky notes stuck to other sticky notes and like people having like a fight back and forth about whose fault everything was, right? And like it gets gross and also is a waste of a lot of trees, honestly, right? But like I'm sure you found yourself in situations like that before, right? So if you could give me the next slide. What we want to do, oh, you know what? Yeah, we'll do the group exercise now. I was about to go into what assertive communication is. Let's go ahead and do the group exercise now. Let's get back into our groups. Jordan's going to reopen the things online. And for those of you in here, just gather around with people nearby you. But like, let's share some examples. And we all have examples, and probably some of them are mildly funny. When have you gotten into a major fight, like trying to suppress all your emotions, and it eventually blows up on you? Or when have like you and your like roommates or whatever gotten to a major passive aggressive fight, or you and your sister or whatever, right? So go ahead and get in your groups, share some funny stories with each other, and we can all think about how effective or ineffective some of these communication strategies are. So I'll give you. So now we want to talk about assertive communication. That's the solve for this, basically, right? And the solve is like this Venn diagram here, right? Like the idea that like we have passive and aggressive communication based on whether we're focused on our needs or whether we're focused on the other person's needs, right? Passive, I just like you have your win. Aggressive, I just want mine and I don't care about yours, right? The middle is what we need to be looking for, right? The overlap between those two things where your needs meet the other person's needs. If we can focus on that, we're able to find healthy, assertive communication, right? And basically, it requires us sharing our thoughts, feelings, and needs in the moment with the other person's same thoughts, feelings, and needs in mind as well, and actively discussing those things rather than just like not discussing them, right? And trying to make any requests we might have to meet our needs into being requests rather than like aggressive demands, right? And so this can be kind of challenging for folks, right? We maybe don't have a lot of experience doing that. And so if you go to the next slide, and if you go to pages 4 and 5 here in the workbook, there's some examples of a lot of different types of assertions that you might make, right? So there's like basic assertions, empathetic, escalating, et cetera, et cetera. There's some examples of all of them there, right? But the biggest, like most common thing you'll hear about is I statements, right? So if you've ever like gone to couples counseling or like seen it on TV or something like that, right? People will talk about using I language or I statements, right? That's actually at the top of page 5 in the packet, right? So, and I think it's a really good like framework that we can consider how we can make better assertions, right? So like it's when you blank, it affects blank, and I feel blank, therefore I would like you to blank, right? It's like the what is happening, the effect, and my response to that, and what I would like instead. So there's an example there, right? When you shout, I'm unable to work with you and I feel angry. I would like you to stop shouting and just tell me what you want, right? Like that's a good I statement, right? And you're starting with how it's affecting you. So you're sharing what you are experiencing, right? Hopefully the other person is able to make similar I statements back, right? Um, Maybe they're not, right? And then that would be a person maybe you're in somewhat of an unhealthy relationship with, and we can have other conversations about that, right? But like that's like the basic structure for asserting ourselves. But I've been doing this counseling thing now for a long time, 15 years. And like, I think that oftentimes we do have struggles with asserting ourselves, but maybe it's not that technical issue, right? Maybe it's not like we don't know how to phrase an I statement. I need a list of blanks here, Nathaniel, right? I think what matters more is our ability to embrace our own needs, right? Our ability to understand that we are allowed to assert ourselves. And in fact, asserting ourselves can make relationships healthier, even if it leads to like more conflict, right? That can be a healthy thing, right? And so that's what I have on page 6 here. This is an interpersonal effectiveness worksheet. This comes from like style therapy called DBT, right? And I hope everybody can bust out your workbooks right now. Go to page 6 and look at these like 18 statements that we got on. There's a whole bunch of different ones, right? It's okay to want or need something from somebody else. Or I have a choice to ask someone for what I need. Or I can stand it if I don't get what I want. Or, like there's a million of them. I'm not going to read every single one of these things to you because that would be me up here reading for a long time. And you guys know how to read. But like I can assert myself even though I may inconvenience other people. Or maybe I want to please the people I care about, but I don't have to please them at all times. Or I'm under no obligation to say yes just because somebody asked me for something. Right. All of these are different statements that are true statements that are almost like cheerleading statements, right? These are the kind of statements that can hopefully we can make them into your mantra a little bit. Maybe you can pick up your favorite one and like put it on your phone background or put it, tape it to your mirror or something like that, right? So that we can respond and remember these things on an ongoing basis, because that's what's going to help us be more assertive. It's not the technical knowledge, right? But it's rather the belief that we deserve to be able to assert ourselves and the belief that this is an important thing for us to do, right? So I'm not going to break us back into groups again because we've been doing a lot of groups today already, but I want you to go ahead and, grab a pen or jot something down or just take a mental note. Which 2 or 3 statements on here vibe with you the most? Which ones are the ones that you need to hear in your life that you need to convince yourself of? Right. So go ahead and read through them right now. Give us a couple minutes, and just grab a highlighter, a pen, or whatever, and mark down the ones that feel like they connect with you the most. So a couple more like scriptural inspirations here. So this is Matthew 18, right? This is a long one, right? But basically, it's a biblical idea of conflict management. You see, like basically, if somebody you have a conflict with, somebody sins against you, right? You go and just approach them one on one. Don't like make it a big deal, right? Go directly to them and have an open and honest conversation, right? If that's not working, maybe bring in a couple like neutral third parties, right? Some support here, right? If that's not working, maybe like go confront them as a group, right? If that's not working, like at a certain point, you just gotta be like, listen, I'm done with you. You're a toxic presence in my life. Like we're not doing this no more, right? But this idea of like trying to take like the small steps, right? Because when we take the small steps, we have more opportunity for repair and growth, right? If we go nuclear, like at the beginning, we're not going to have that opportunity, right? The other one that I have up here that I think is very important is also from Matthew, but for judge for you or you will be judged, right? Like this is the one here. For first take the log out of your own eye, right? Before judging the speck in your neighbor, right? You can't be starting conflicts with somebody about something that is not their thing, but it's your thing, right? When do you need to take responsibility for your own self and not be hypocritical in what you ask for others, right? Because that's just not going to work out well. And it's not going to lead to productive, healthy conflict management. It's going to lead to fights, right? That don't go anywhere, right? So you got to check yourself first as well. So these are obviously the biblical inspirations for this, but I think it's borne out as well, like in common grace, common spaces as well. If you could go to the next slide, right? So how many of you have heard of like minimally invasive procedures before, right? Anybody's ever gotten a surgery, or if you have any friends who've gotten a surgery, right? They're gonna like always gonna try and like do the least amount of cutting on your body as possible, right? Because you're gonna heal up faster. You're gonna have less scar tissue, right? It's gonna be more possible to grow and recover, right? And so that that idea of a minimally invasive procedure, that's exactly like what we're talking about in terms of the conflict management and approaching one-on-one, right? Because that gives us more opportunity to grow, right? And then self-reflection, right? That's what we call, literally what I was talking about, don't be a hypocrite, right? In Matthew, right? We call that self-reflection, right? And I think it's important to like self-reflect before we go into any kind of conflict situation, right? To decide, what am I really upset about, right? Sometimes we're really angry or stressed or something about a different thing, right? And then we take it out on somebody in one of our relationships, right? And we say that they're doing something wrong, they're harming me or whatever, but it's really not that. It's really that it's finals week and like I'm really stressed out and I haven't slept, right? And so check yourself, make sure what you're feeling isn't a you thing, but rather is really about the relationship or a conflict in the relationship, right? And then also ask yourself, are my expectations fair? Right? This is about the hypocrisy thing. If you want your roommate to do X, Y, or Z, or if you want your boyfriend to do X, Y, or Z, or if you want your, mom to do X, Y, or Z, right? Like, if you wouldn't do that for them, then that's not a fair expectation for them to do for you as well, right? And so, like, those are places where we need to check ourselves and self-reflect before we go about starting like the process of addressing a conflict with somebody, right? Okay, so hopefully, then give me the next slide, Jordan, please. If you're able to do that, if you're able to self-reflect and you're able to approach a conflict in a minimally invasive way, what do we do in that conversation? This part I think is a little bit more technical, right? Because we're used to being able to like assert ourselves a little bit, but we need like encouragement to do it. With conflict management, sometimes we don't know how to conflict management because this is a little bit more involved, right? And sometimes we're used to being kind of more passive to avoid conflict, so we don't get good at it, right? Because we've never really practiced it, right? And so I do want to talk a little bit more technically about conflict mediation and to really introduce the idea of positions and interests, right? Everybody has some kind of position in an argument, right? That's what they say they want to do, right? And so my position may be that, like, uh, I want to go to Chick-fil-A tonight for dinner or whatever, and I'm going with my roommate, and they say they don't want to do that. They want to go to Taco Bell, right? And now we're in a big argument over this. Okay, this is not something you'd be in a big argument over, but this is just an example to highlight, right? Those are both the positions. The stated position is where I want to go for dinner, right? But what are the interests behind that? Why do we pick the things we want to pick? Maybe the first person is like really wants to go get chicken, right? That's what they're interested in getting. And then maybe the other person does not want to go to Chick-fil-A because, in my opinion, Chick-fil-A is massively overpriced and I don't like their food, right? Maybe this is just a me thing, right? I know this is an unpopular opinion in APU, but like, okay, if those are their real interests, the reason that they're picking what they're picking, then you could very easily satisfy both of those interests by like going to Popeyes, right? Like, or going to Cane's maybe, right? I don't know why there are so many chicken restaurants right next to APU campus, but there legitimately are way too many chicken restaurants, right? Like, there are other options, and your compromise can meet both people's interests, but not necessarily their position, right? It's much easier to change your position on something than it is to change your underlying interest. because your underlying interest, that's the need that you're trying to fulfill, right? And again, that's why we get into aggressive communication, because we're both fighting for our needs, right? But if we can identify what that need is, what our actual interest is in an argument, and then find a way to meet both interests, we'll be so much more successful than if we get caught up in just what everybody says that they want, what everybody says that they need, right? So everybody kind of interest position, we're getting it. Okay, cool. Give me the next slide here. Or maybe if the computer is not too slow. Sometimes this thing is so slow. So let me give a couple practical tips. This is just like a kind of a 101 kind of idea, right? So I do have what's called a checklist for a good relationship resolution. So basically, these suggestions are on page 8, and then the checklist is on page 9 in your packets, right? But like a couple of suggestions here. Set up a time to talk and do it in person wherever it's possible, or do it over the phone, or do it on a video call or something if you can't physically meet up with a person, right? Why do you do that, right? Well, if you're blindsided by a difficult conversation, you're gonna like potentially be more stressed and react more negatively, right? Somebody ambushes you, right? So let's not ambush other people that we're going to have a conversation with, right? If we have a problem with somebody, if we want to work it out, and we want that to be a healthy way of working out the conflict, let's say, hey, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. Can we get dinner later? Can we get coffee later? Can we meet up later? Whatever, right? Something. Set a time so that they know we're sitting down to talk about something important, right? And then don't do it over text, right? There's so many times that like people come in like I'm doing counseling with folks, and they'll say, so I was talking to so and so and they were saying this and that, and I was like, wait, were you actually talking to them? No, we were texting, right? Well, that's fine. Texting people is good. Like DMing people is good. That's fine. But for important conversations, it is so easy to misunderstand or misread people over a text, right? It just is, right? And so physically talking to somebody with your normal human voice is going to be critical for positively resolving conflicts. Second is be assertive, not aggressive. So we've already been talking about that a lot, right? Recognize both your needs and their needs and respect both of those things. Don't just respect yours or don't just respect theirs. Then work to identify those interests rather than positions. We were just talking about interests versus positions. And then once you do that, hopefully you can reach some kind of an agreement, right? This is what the checklist that I have on page 9 for you is, right? An agreement has to be realistic and specific in order for it to work, right? And so this thing is like breaks it down like a little bit too specifically sometimes, but it can be a good tool if you're getting started, right? On mediating something. Basically, who, what, when, and where. What are people going to do? Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? How is it going to resolve the relationship? And then check, right? Not only is it balanced, do like both people really actually want to commit to doing this, or is one person just pretending to want to commit to it to get out of the conflict, right? Do both people really want to commit to it? And more importantly than that, even can both of those people commit to it, right? Like because if somebody says, when I'm upset, I want you to like always like answer my text message back immediately, right? And like, okay, that's fine. Like I'm your partner, I'm happy to do that. And I will always text you back immediately. No, 2 in the morning when you text your girlfriend, she's going to be asleep. Like during the middle of your boyfriend's shift, he's not going to text you back, right? Like that's not a thing that can happen, right? And so check that both people can actually do what they promise, because otherwise the thing's going to fall apart, and that makes the resolution worse because then you promised to do something, you've broken that promise, right? And that makes the conflict worse instead of better. And then will the resolution solve the problem? And will it maybe just solve it for right now, or is this a long-term solution? And both are fine, right? As long as both people acknowledge what's fine, right? I think that short-term solutions are oftentimes really good, like in this context, right? Any of you that are like living on campus, you got roommates, right? Maybe you're assigned to a roommate you don't like. Or maybe you were best friends with this person. You thought you'd room together, and it turns out they're a terrible fit for you in terms of living with you. They're a great friend, but a terrible roommate, right? Those short-term solutions can be fine because, like, you're gonna move out in May. Like, it's not that long till we're done with this thing, right? So, like, can we reach a solution that people can commit to, even just for a short term, right? That's still a good conflict management strategy. Now, of course, like in other relationships, you're going to want to find more long term solutions, right? With family members or with romantic partners or with friends or something like that, right? But it depends on the type of relationship it is, that the type of the solution that you're going to need, right? Um, and then seek help from a third party when you need to, somebody that's not involved, right? Like, it's not useful to get somebody that is like on one or another person's side, because that's not good, right? Or sometimes it's hard, like when they're like three roommates and like you try to bring in the third person as a mediator, like they don't want to be doing that mediation. Like, that's not fair to ask of them. So when you need a mediator, like a great way to do that, here's my free plug for the counseling center, right? The counseling center is free and confidential, available to you throughout the duration of your stay here at APU. Literally come in, we'll do a conflict management session with you. We're happy to do that. Or, if you're living on campus, like the RAs will do that if it's like a roommate thing, right? Or like whatever, right? These kind of things are useful ways to get a third party mediator. And then follow up with it again to make sure that it's still working, and to acknowledge, like thankfulness if it is working. Thank you for doing the thing that I asked you to do, like, and that shows your appreciation for it and that reinforces the behavior, right? So this is how you make a good conflict resolution. Okay, but I see we're all getting very tired. It's just about 3 o'clock now, or 2 o'clock now, excuse me. That clock is 1 hour fast. I was like, geez, how did I go half an hour over? So let's wrap this up for today. If you could give me the next few slides here, Jordan. So first off, thanks everybody for being here. Like I said, I do ads for the counseling center because I do work at the counseling center. So please come check us out anytime you want. We're just past the baseball field here in like the Shire Mods living area. You can also see us on Zoom or over the phone if you would like. It's all free and it's all confidential. Next one is we've got a call to action, right? I was already bothering you about this, but one thing that I taught you today, go do it. Because if you don't go do it, this is pointless to you, right? So think about one thing that you learned today, one thing you want to take away, and go practice it this weekend or next week, or over the holidays when you're going to have all those family over, including those like cousins or uncles that you don't really like. Like, how are you going to conflict manage with them, right? Take something away from what we talked about today. Next slide for me, please. Jordan and I will be up here for any questions that you have. So you can type them in the chat. You can also DM them to Jordan in the chat as well if you prefer to do it individually. And those of you in here, come on up, ask us questions whenever you like. These workshops are partially sponsored by our project. Oh, I skipped a slide. We've got one more of these. If you want to come next week, right before Thanksgiving, we're going to do time management and goal setting, right? Just in time for you to do your final study, right? So come check us out next week, either online or in person if you would like. This is also our last one for the term, so it's a great opportunity for get any more SONA credits or other things that you need extra credit for your class. This is going to be literally the last one, so get it while it's hot. Now, the Project Youth Wellness. These workshops are sponsored in part by our Project Youth Wellness team on campus, and they have a lot of other great resources. So you can scan this QR code if you want, or Google APU Project Youth Wellness, and you see all the stuff. But the thing